Pistoia Dialoghi sull'uomo ha il piacere e l'onore di presentare il professor Jared Diamond, autore di molti libri di successo e senza dubbio uno dei più importanti e influenti intellettuali contemporanei. I suoi lavori, tra i quali ricordiamo Armi, acciaio e malattie, breve storia del mondo negli ultimi 13.000 anni, Collasso, il mondo fino a ieri e Crisi, Diamond ha affrontato con incredibile maestria e capacità di scrittura le principali tematiche relative all'evoluzione della nostra specie e alle vicende di noi umani, arrivando a spiegarci molti eventi del presente. Il successo delle opere di Jared Diamond è dovuto anche alla sua capacità di realizzare una vera e propria storia globale, ma soprattutto al sapere muoversi attraverso i confini di discipline diverse fino a consegnarci degli affreschi ricchi, completi ed entusiasmanti come un romanzo di avventura. Assieme a Marco Aime ho realizzato questa intervista che vi presentiamo. Welcome to Pistoia Dialoghi sull'uomo, Jared Diamond. It's a great honor and great pleasure. Buongiorno Jared. The first question. Your most famous book in the Italian translation is titled Guns, Steel and Disease, Malattie. But in the original, instead of disease, there is germs. A very topical issue in times of coronavirus. Globalization turned against those who produce it.
Globalization and diseases. As you say, diseases in the title of my book, diseases, my book title did not have the word diseases. My book title had the word germs. But there are two sorts of diseases. There are diseases caused by germs. Those are communicable diseases, such as AIDS and COVID, and in the past, smallpox. But there are also diseases that are not caused by germs at all. Those are lifestyle diseases. And we Americans are more susceptible to lifestyle diseases than are you Italians. Why? Because you Italians live healthier lives. You have healthier diets. You Italians have a Mediterranean diet. You consume much olive oil. You consume fish. You consume vegetables. We Americans, we eat fatty foods. Americans tend to be overweight. In Italy, few Italians are overweight. We Americans, most Americans don't exercise. And the result is what are called non-communicable diseases, diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, cancer. Those are the causes of the deaths of most Americans. No longer smallpox, no longer COVID. And I regret to say that these non-communicable diseases are also the causes of the deaths of most Italians. Most Italians today, for 50 years, no Italian has died of smallpox. Few Italians have died of measles. Instead, increasingly, you, like we Americans, are dying of high blood pressure and heart disease and stroke and cancer. What can you do about it? Pursue your Mediterranean diet, consume more olive oil, more fish, work out, do your exercises, walk a lot. You Italians live longer than do us Americans.
Thank you. The subject of Pistoia Festival this year is Other Horizon, Walking, Knowing, Discovering. Isn't it a bit a summary of the history of humanity?
Knowing and discovering. One can say that 80,000 years of the history of humanity is knowing and discovering, and that it has accelerated within the last few thousand years, and now especially it has accelerated within the last couple of decades. The things that I can know and discover now were impossible for me 20 or 30 years ago. This morning, for example, a friend in Australia sent me a map of New Guinea mountains and birds. And just by pressing a few buttons, I could see altitudes from satellites that were unknowable 20 or 30 years ago. It's a wonderful time to be alive, and at the same time, it's a terrible time to be alive.
You and many other scholars argue that Neolithic man was the greatest man in history. Why? What are the characteristics that make it so?
Well, Neolithic man and Neolithic woman, either we can learn about from archaeology, but there are also Neolithic people in the modern world. My New Guinea friends, where I've been working in New Guinea since 1964, some of my New Guinea friends were still Neolithic. They were still making stone tools. One of my friends, New Guinea friends, told me about his last trip to the stone quarry to make stone tools in 1979. So there are still Neolithic people in New Guinea. So are New Guineans the greatest people? They're wonderful in some respects, and we have advantages over them in other respects. We live longer. We have access to far more knowledge. We know more about the world. Those are advantages we have over Neolithic woman and man. Advantages that they have are they're more socially skilled than us. They're not dependent upon the internet. They don't communicate with each other by cell phones. And so they're accustomed to looking each other in the face and reading their expressions and reading their body language. So New Guineans are socially skilled compared to modern Americans and even modern Italians, because we're not accustomed to looking people in the face and reading their body language. I must say my own children are 34 years old, and I'm shocked by the limitations in the social skills of young people today, because they communicate constantly by these devices. Just as an example, here's an example. It may sound funny, but it's true. There was a group of New Guinea villagers in an area with oil fields where a Western oil company, Chevron, wanted to develop the fields, but they needed the permission from the villagers. These were village farmers who had never been away from New Guinea. They had never been more than 20 kilometers from their village. And so the Western lawyers, the international lawyers, flew into New Guinea in order to make a contract. And they thought, this is going to be easy. These poor people will get everything that we want. But it turned out that the New Guineans had much more experience of negotiating. Instead of immediately starting to discuss, they wanted to begin with a welcome and questions, and then some more questions, and then a feast. And then the lawyers began to negotiate. And one New Guinean said, yes, we agree. The lawyer said, we'll come back tomorrow morning and sign the agreement. They came back, and another New Guinean said, oh, that agreement was yesterday. That was another New Guinean. That agreement doesn't count. We start over again. The New Guineans had a much wider range of negotiating techniques, including telling lies, starting the negotiation again, wanting to interrupt the feast. And at the end of 2 days, the lawyers were just tearing their hair out, and the New Guineans got everything that they wanted just because they had far more social skills than did these international lawyers. That's an example, Julia, of ways in which Neolithic people have advantages over us. They're more socially skilled, they're more attentive to danger, they think more carefully, they're much better at telling stories, they have richer social lives. And nevertheless, I'm happy to be living in the United States, because if I were living in New Guinea, I would have been dead 40 years ago.
Thank you. You say that invention is the mother of necessity. Does this mean that the imagination brings us outside the borders of normality?
Does imagination bring us outside of our boundaries? Is imagination the mother of necessity? Yes and no. And this is a very interesting question. How much innovation comes as a result of directed efforts, and how much happens just by chance? Some innovation comes as a result of directed efforts. When Bill Gates, very smart fellow, when Bill Gates invented the personal computer instead of the gigantic computers that we used to work with. Bill Gates wanted to devise a personal computer. He saw a need for it. He and Paul Allen worked together and they responded to a need. That's an innovation responding to a need. There are also innovations that don't respond to any need whatsoever. And a prime example of that is the discovery of the first wonder antibiotic, penicillin. It's not that a biologist wanted to discover a great antibiotic. It's instead that a biologist was studying the growth of moles, and the biologist had a petri dish, and it just happened that the mold disappeared at a dot in the petri dish and then disappeared in a gradually expanding dot. Why? Because something had fallen in from the outside. It was something that was making penicillin. That was a discovery by accident. And so some innovations are intended and some innovations are the result of chance.
Thank you very much. Too much journey, too many discoveries. However, if used incorrectly, they can lead to collapse. Should we perhaps put limits on our Promethean trust?
That's a dilemma. Technology leads to wonderful things. Technology makes it possible for me to communicate by phone and by email with my Italian friends now. When I first went to Europe, I lived in Europe from 1958 to 1962. And in those days, there was no email. Even to telephone my parents, I had to write them a letter 3 weeks in advance, telling them that I would telephone them on a particular day at a particular moment, and I paid for 8 minutes of telephone conversation. It must have been agonizing for my parents. And now I just pick up the telephone and I can talk with my Italian friends and I can talk with my Australian friends. Those are the wonders of technology. But technology can be used for good things, it can be used for bad things. Technology was used by some people on September 11, 2001 to fly airplanes into the trade centers of New York City and to kill 2,000 people. Technology was used to harness atomic power. Nuclear power now provides most of the energy for France, but nuclear power within a few seconds killed 100,000 people at Hiroshima. Technology, modern technology, brings us power and it brings us destruction.
Another question about this issue. In your opinion, is it possible that in some cases we have strayed too far from nature and now we can't or don't want to go back?
Have we strayed too far from nature? We have a love-hate. There's an English expression, a love-hate relationship, an ambivalent relationship, where on the one hand we love and on the other hand we hate. Why do we have COVID now? It's because of a love-hate relationship with nature. On the one hand, so many people are living in cities around the world. At the same time, we want things from nature. There are many people in East Asia who want products from animals. In particular, there's an animal that we call the pangolin with scales. Those scales are highly prized. Pangolins and civets and other animals acquire diseases from bats. And then when humans trade these animals in markets in East Asia, that is how SARS came to us in 2002. And it's probably how COVID came to us at the end of 2019. So the emerging diseases of humans in the last 50 years, the emerging diseases, AIDS and SARS and Ebola and Marburg and now COVID, and in the past, smallpox, these diseases came to us from animals. So on the one hand, we love nature. We love to go to national parks. In Italy, you love to watch bears. In Italy, my Italian ornithologist friends love to take me to the salt marshes near Rome, and we can watch the phenicoptera, the flamingos there. But on the other hand, also we catch diseases from nature, and that all then illustrates our love-hate experiences with nature.
The whole history of Homo sapiens is made up of movements, of traveling on foot. We were born on to move, and basically we continue to be. Today, however, we no longer accept that people move, especially if they come to our country.
Movement of people, a big problem. A big problem and a source of, on the one hand, a source of strength, and the other hand, a big problem. I know this problem from my stay in Italy. My closest collaborator in Italy, my friend Alfonso Giordano at Luis in Rome, he's an expert on immigration. I know what immigration means in Europe, the problems of immigration. I know what movements of people, what immigration means in the United States. All Americans are immigrants, even Native Americans. They immigrated to North America 13,000 years ago. And then Europeans began to immigrate to North America around 1608, the first European settlers in North America. Most Americans today are either first-generation immigrants or children of immigrants. My father immigrated to the United States from Russia when he was 2 years old in the year 1904. My wife's parents immigrated to the United States from Poland in 1948. Immigrants, to decide to immigrate requires courage, it requires ambition, it requires willingness to try something new. And so most American Nobel Prize winners are either immigrants or the children of immigrants. Why? Because to immigrate, you require courage, you have to be willing to try something new, but to win a Nobel Prize, you require courage, you require trying something new. So immigration has been the source, one of the major sources of the great strengths of the United States. But on the other hand, there are limits to immigration. In the world today, there are about 1 billion rich people in Italy and Australia and Japan and the United States and Canada, and there are about 6.5 billion poor people. Poor countries are poor, especially for geographic regions. Tropical countries, countries with tropical diseases, countries with thin tropical soils tend to be poor. And so people in countries that are poor for geographic reasons want to immigrate to countries that are rich for geographic reasons, like Italy and Germany and Australia and Japan and the United States and Canada. But it's impossible for 6 billion people to immigrate from poor countries to rich countries. And so the dilemma for immigration is to get the benefits of immigration while recognizing the impossibility of transferring 6 billion people from poor countries to rich countries. the only solution, the only possible solution will have to be for rich countries to help poor countries overcome their geographic disadvantages. And there are countries that were poor for geographic reasons that in my lifetime have become rich. Prime example, South Korea. When I was in my teens, South Korea was a poor country. Today, South Korea is a first world country. Singapore, when I was growing up, Singapore was poor. Today, Singapore is a first world country. So it is possible for poor countries to become rich. Often they will need help from rich countries, but the only possible solution in this globalized world for a stable world is not a world where everybody immigrates from poor countries to rich countries, but it's a world where rich countries, for their own selfish reasons, help poor countries to become richer.
Last question. In the world until yesterday has developed a pessimistic vision of the cultural diversity. Don't you think that reserve possibilities of different conception of the environment can instead give us suggestion for a world of tomorrow?
Yes, indeed. We can learn from other people. In particular, we can learn from the world until yesterday. We can either learn from the world until yesterday by reading old books, or we can learn about the world until yesterday by meeting people who are still living a traditional lifestyle, the people of New Guinea. And I will give you examples of both of those things. What book am I reading now? I'm reading the Odyssey, Odyssea, the Odyssey, that great Greek epic, composed 1200 BC, composed 3,200 years ago. In the Odyssey, there are these long speeches. Odysseus and others give long speeches, and they're very good speeches. Why? Because there was not much writing then, and people talked and they talked and they talked, and they talked very interestingly. So that's one thing we can learn from the world of yesterday, to talk more and to talk interestingly. But we can also learn from New Guineans. I've learned two things from New Guineans that have changed my life. One is New Guineans are very aware of danger. In the United States, we're not so aware of danger because if we have a danger, if we hurt ourselves, we just go to the hospital and get fixed. In New Guinea, where there are not hospitals in remote areas, New Guineans have to be very careful of danger, because if they fall down and break their leg, they're not going to be able to get out to the hospital. So I've learned from New Guineans to be much more careful. I'm alert to dangers. My alertness to dangers drives my American friends crazy. It exasperates my wife and my children and my American friend, because Jared is always thinking of what can go wrong. But I've learned from New Guinea to think of what can go wrong. And the other thing that I learned from New Guinea was how to bring up children. My children were born just short of my 50th birthday. I was 49 and a half when my children were born. I hadn't thought much about children. My wife wanted children, and eventually I read, yes, I wanted children, but I had not paid attention to children. And so when our children were born, my models for bringing up children were my New Guinea friends. I hadn't watched Americans bring up children. And my New Guinea friends, their attitude towards bringing up children is babies and children, they have to learn for themselves. They have to take risks. And if they take risks, they will learn to be careful. My children, I allowed my children to take risks, not too much risks. I did not allow them to get killed by cars on the street, but I allowed my children to make choices. And the result was some surprising things. When one of my son Max, who's here in the house at the moment, when Max was 3 years old, Max saw his first snake, serpente, and it was love at first sight. My wife and I are not snake lovers, but here was this boy who saw a snake and it was love of a snake. He makes a choice. At age 3, he fell in love with snakes. The result was that he became a biologist. He still has a pet turtle. At one point, he had 146 pet snakes and frogs and salamanders. He made his choice. Eventually, he decided to choose to become a chef. He went to culinary school, and now he's at graduate school at the University of California, Santa Barbara, developing a career in the sustainable food industry. So I learned from the world until yesterday from New Guineans to let my children make choices rather than being a typical American parent who takes their children here and there and there and thus does not allow their children to make choices. I learned from the world until yesterday, then by being very careful about dangers and by allowing my children to make choices.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would like to add another more question, a personal question. Um, how is your life? How it has been your life during this month, during the first coronavirus here? Can you tell us something, please?
Yes, the coronavirus has brought big changes. Obviously, we think first of the terrible changes. What are the terrible changes? 5 of my wife's and my dearest friends, friends who we've known for 50 or 60 years, friends who we met in childhood and teenagers, they died. And I'm sure all of you have lost dear friends from the coronavirus. That's one of the terrible things. Another terrible thing is the loss of social contacts. We have our social contacts not face to face, but by the internet. We've lost the opportunity to meet people in person. This coming Saturday night, today is what? Today is Tuesday. This coming Saturday, in 5 days, for the first time, my wife and I will have friends over for dinner. Why? Because my wife and I have gotten vaccinated and our friends have gotten vaccinated. The first time in a year that we will have friends over for dinner. That's the bad side about coronavirus. Paradoxically, the coronavirus has had benefits. My wife and I are spending this year most of our time at home. I spend more time with my wife than I do in the previous 2 years. It's wonderful to be with my wife all day, every day. Another benefit of the coronavirus, I have all this time to do bird walks. Another benefit, around the corner from me lives a friend, a cellist, a friend who plays violoncello. She's very careful, just as I, because she has young children. And so, because I'm a pianist, I spend more time playing kammermusik, chamber music, music for archi. I've spent more time playing music with my friend around the corner. We've been playing the Bach cello and piano sonatas and the Beethoven cello and piano sonatas, and now the Brahms cello and piano sonatas. So thanks to the coronavirus, I've spent more time with my wife and more time watching birds and more time playing music, but less time seeing friends in person. So the coronavirus has brought tragedy, but it has also brought benefits. Our hope is that with vaccination, perhaps we'll be able to retain some of these benefits of the coronavirus, and perhaps we'll be able to get over the tragedies of the coronavirus.
Thank you very much. As always, it's a great honor and pleasure to be able to have a conversation with you. Thank you again very much.